First question. Correct me if I'm wrong in these numbers, but I think the Biden administration is releasing 50 million barrels from the strategic reserve. The United States consumers use about 20 million barrels per day. If those numbers are accurate, is this going to have any substantive effect whatsoever?
Well, as you mentioned, it doesn't sound like a whole lot, but I would point out to the significance still of 50 million barrels. I would look, however, though, at the breakdown of the president's plan. 32 of those 50 million barrels are exchange barrels, meaning that the government will front oil to oil companies that want it, and those oil companies will eventually have to return that oil back to the SPR, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. And then the other 18 million barrels are simply front end loaded. That is 18 million barrels that were going to be scheduled to be released anyway in the years ahead under the previous administration, now being accelerated under President Biden. All things considered here, aside from the IOU that the government, or I should say oil companies, will have to give the government, that there's not a whole lot of oil actually being released to the market. And I think that's why oil prices today jumped over 2% as a result. This was a very underwhelming an announcement.
Yeah, the way you describe it, it sounds like, they're moving the cups with the ball underneath, just
Yeah,
moving it around a little bit.
it's a little bit of accounting shenanigans or accounting trickery, right? You're accelerating something that was going to happen, and you're saying, here, you can borrow some oil, but pay it back later. I don't know if that would qualify in my definition of a release. When you give somebody a gift or when you release something, it's gone. But now the administration is releasing something it will claw back later. So I think that's why the oil market was disappointed, and surprisingly, why the price of oil jumped after the announcement.
I don't want to. I hesitate to ask you certain questions because I don't like asking you inherently political questions. But I saw you tweet out just the other day that both Oklahoma and Texas were in the under $3 a gallon club. I don't know if
Hmm.
they're back there today, but a part of me wonders, is this necessary to do this right now? Or is this a president who's looking at approval numbers below 50% and trying to do something that people might like? And obviously there's a home heating, aspect to this as well, I would imagine. But when I look at those gas prices, they don't seem overly exorbitant.
Well, we are at 7-year highs, and Americans have faced the biggest year-on-year increases this year that we've ever seen, barely eclipsing a couple of instances in the past. So I think putting that in context, no, gas prices are not at record highs, but they've never increased at a faster year-on-year pace. And so, of course, that's affecting the president. But a lot of that goes into wrong assumptions that the president is the one pushing prices up, which is also incorrect. But the president maybe realizes that Americans aren't going to figure out that he doesn't have all these magic wands. So he's trying to ease a situation that he has a limited ability to do so. And I think it's going to shine through that the president has only a limited ability to fix this situation. As you point out correctly, that the U.S. consumes about 20 million barrels of oil per day. So 50 million barrels, more than half of which is just kind of being lent out, doesn't bode well. This is 2.5 days of U.S. consumption. So all in all, again, this is underwhelming. This release, and it's highlighted by the fact that oil prices went up today. Having said that, there still will be some measure of relief in gas prices. In fact, in Grand Rapids, I did see already a couple of stations back under $3, which is very welcome. And part of the reason is that oil prices have been declining in the last week, expecting that this was imminent. So we can say at least part of the reason for the decline is because of President Biden's move. Now, keep in mind, there's always more than one factor driving prices up or down. The fact that COVID cases are on the surge in Europe, which is causing some countries to limit travel movements, thus limiting oil demand, is also having an effect. But absolutely. I mean, there will be some measure of impact from the president's decision. But I'd sum it up like this. I think most Americans are hoping for and expecting much more relief at the pump than this is going to deliver.
One follow-up question then for you, because you answered my other questions with that, which is very good. They're expecting more relief than this. Dovetailing after what you just said, is there much
Mhm.
the president or any president would be able to do to provide the relief that they want?
Boy, I mean, that's fairly loaded. So a president, there's two levers that make up gas prices, or two functions. They are supply and demand. Is the president going to be successful in asking Americans to drive less? Probably no way, because we're free and this is America and we drive wherever the heck we want. So, can the president impact supply? Well, I think that's where he's maybe gone into the White House and had maybe better intentions, but those intentions flipped on him. That is, the hostility towards the oil industry does have an impact. That is, the president has made it more difficult for oil companies to provide the market demand for oil that is out there, and so that's had an impact as well. I wouldn't say so much, this isn't really about the Keystone, but it's more about the psychology of a president that is less friendly to the oil sector and the overall political movement against fossil fuels companies. It's becoming less socially acceptable to do business with fossil fuels companies, and states like California and New York have divested of their fossil fuels holdings. And so oil companies have said, well, how can we stop shareholders from fleeing our company? Well, they're shoring up their balance sheet. That is, they're issuing buybacks and dividends to keep shareholders there instead of putting the money back into producing more oil. So, grand scheme, I think the cliff notes here is that the president has been so forward-looking in how to get the country to move to EVs that he's forgot that we need to transition there. And I think he's made some he's made some poor choices along the way, and we're essentially paying for some of those decisions now.